Beyond the Spot, Decolonizing Healing One Brain at a Time, is a podcast that weaves my first love, of course, brain spotting, and somatic informed modalities with embodied healing, cultural consciousness, and real talk about trauma, resilience, and recovery. Hosted by Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, a licensed professional counselor, spiritual healer, and the first Black female brain spotting trainer in the world. Each episode dares to dismantle mental health myths, uplift lived experiences, and restore collective wisdom. One conversation at a time. Beyond the Spot podcast is for educational purposes and is not therapy. Please reach out to licensed medical and mental health professionals. Thank you. Welcome to Beyond the Spot, decolonizing healing one brain at a time. I am your host, Tracy Gantlin-Monroy, and today we're starting at the beginning, not just my beginning, but yours. The spot and the story that lives underneath it. That's what we're talking about today. And it's only fair to tell you a little bit about me. So, I started my journey as a mental health clinician, around 2010 or so. And that puts me right at the 15-year mark. I have been licensed since 2012. And with that, be clear, I have found that with mental health clinicians, when we learn formally through school and meet all the requirements to even sit for the national exam, we pass, we receive our associate license in most cases. Be clear that that associate license for me was the equivalent of a driver's permit. What am I saying there? Receiving my associate license gave me the authority to practice. In fact, as a licensed professional counselor, when I was licensed, you couldn't even pull down your license, so to speak, individually. You had to be attached somewhere whereby supervision was a part of that whole process. So the first job that I had, which was a community-based mental health clinic or agency as it's known, held my license. And they also provided me with supervision. That's a whole nother story for another day. Okay. So with that, as someone who is trained in both the clinical and the spiritual, I know that healing happens in more than one realm. Brain spotting honors that. So many would ask, what is this girl's deal with brain spotting? The fact of the matter is I received a healing in my very first brain spotting training with an absolute stranger. And so with that, I give credit to spirit and the revolutionary modality of brain spotting in and of itself. So I am a survivor of family violence. And with that, I want to put it in perspective so you can get it. So I was in a phase 1 training in Atlanta. And during brain spotting trainings, you are taught didactically, you view slides, you witness a demonstration by the trainer. whereby they work with someone who's attending, who volunteers, and they demonstrate every frame setup that you will learn. And then after you watch that demonstration, you do a debrief about what you witnessed, what it meant, all the things. And then you go into what we call practicums. And practicums is an opportunity to apply and practice that in which you've learned. And so we were placed 2 on 2. So it was 2 by 2 dyads, 2 persons, and each attendee gets to practice being the therapist as well as being the client using the frame setup that you learned during the demonstration. Well, during that practicum, I was working with a young man from Alaska. And to show you how powerful this was, we immediately gained a connection around our desire to learn brain spotting. With that being said, during that practicum, that was for practice, my trauma content came to the surface and totally erupted. With that being said, it was beyond anything I had ever experienced. After that powerful engagement and experience, when I left training that day, I reached out to my mom. Let me not forget, when I started my brain spotting journey, I invited one of my colleagues to join me, which was a beautiful thing. We'll get to the whole BIPOC brain spotting thing later on. But when we arrived at the training, I was fascinated by the fact that there were only 3 people in the room of about, I don't know, 70 or 80 people that looked like me. One I brought with me, and I identify as American Black. Aletha identifies as she is both Puerto Rican and Black. And there was another sister there that came from Virginia. No, she came from North Carolina to attend the training. So there was about 3 of us there, and it had to been at least 60, 70 people in the room. So I asked the obvious question because remember, this is my first experience in a brain spotting space. So there was someone at the training that my friend and colleague was familiar with. And I was familiar with her by way of my supervisor that I had when I was an associate licensee. And so I asked, how many Black folks involved in brain spotting? Do you white folks have a monopoly on healing? And she laughed, and I asked the trainer. And somehow the trainer and I became connected in that moment. And so, with that, when I initially asked, the mutual friend or acquaintance started counting her fingers, right? When I asked how many people look like me are involved in brain spotting. And I thought, okay, she's counting her fingers. I don't really know what that means, but it doesn't seem like many. Okay. So with that, the experience did it for me. And so after leaving there that day, I called my mom and I said, Ma, let me back up a little bit. Let me back up a little bit. So I asked my dear friend and colleague who came with me, literally, while I was in that practicum, because we were all spreaded around the space and we were sitting across from each other. Each set of 2 sat across from each other in the practicum in person. Because in brain spotting, we do in person trainings and we also do virtual trainings. Okay. Nonetheless, Aletha came over to my space and she was like, "Are you all right? What did that white boy do to you?" And we both laughed. It was the experience of that powerful tool of brain spotting. Nonetheless, I asked my mom, I was like, Ma, I was in a training and I had this experience. What the hell was that? And so she told me. Now, I need you to understand that I was in my 40s. I am now 55. Okay. And so my mom is a truth teller. She's always been a truth teller. And so when I asked her, what was that about? She told me. She told me. And that began a deepened level of my journey because, of course, I have memories of what the experience was like in my family home, very young. Things would become volatile. There would be an eruption. Sometimes it just felt in my system like there was a melee between my dad and my mom and my older siblings. Of course, my participation was to cry, and I created this narrative that they're going to kill my daddy. I said it. And so you could probably guess by now, I am daddy's girl. And my dad is presently late. And fact of the matter is, had my dad been on this side of living, I don't know that we would be having this discourse right now with what I survived through. Nonetheless, having that personal direct healing during a training made me more than curious because be mindful. The reason I was in the training anyway was because I was moving from doing community mental health and transitioning into private practice, at which was an invitation as well by my colleagues. I'll never forget her. And also, she and I share the same name. And so when we were at the community mental health agency, Tracy and I would chit chat during case staffing. And we would be eating snacks. We would all be around the table, staffing the clients of the agency. And so on one occasion, while Tracy and I were chit chatting as we were known to do, she said to me, she said, me and my mom were talking about you. And I thought, what was that about? Talking about me? What were you guys talking about me about? And she got tickled. She says, why are you at this agency? You need to be in private practice. I was like, girl, me and boss man, me and him got a thing. I can ask him whatever I need to ask him. I can say whatever I need to say. In fact, I was part advocate for the team because I, I'm going to say it. God gave me favor with the owner, and I used it for the benefit of the people to be heard, to give us a voice. Nonetheless, when I was preparing myself, okay, we're going to transition from community mental health, which I loved. What Tracy said to me was this. She says, you need to go into private practice. I was like, why? Because I love this work and it's fulfilling for me and all the things and so on and so forth. She says, that's why. She says, as the assessor for this agency, she says, Tracy, you don't know it, but you get the hardest cases on your caseload. I was like, huh? What are you talking about? She said, when I go in and assess your clients initially, she said, the truth is, it's like, are these people okay? She said, when I have that initial assessment with the people that are on your caseload, and when I go back in 6 months to renew their services and to reassess them, she says, honestly, it's as though the dead have come back to living. I was like, girl, you tripping. You always talking crazy. She was like, no, I'm telling you. She said, whatever it is that you got going on, you need to be in private practice so that you can make your money. And I was like, make my money? The owner pays me well, so I thought. She's like, yeah, whatever you're making over here, you can double or triple that in private practice. So I had an inward conversation with myself. I was like, Tracy's tripping, but let's be clear. No, she was not. That's a whole nother story for another day. But while I was preparing to transition, I said, look, I need a tool. Now, be mindful, I'm a broker by trade of many years. So I was like, I need something to set me aside. I need a tool that's going to work with the population I seek to serve. Well, years previous, when I was an associate licensee, my supervisor, Miss Janie, told me about brain spotting. And she was like, TG, I know your tribe. I'm like, you know my tribe? What does that mean? What are you really saying, Miss Janie? She says brain spotting would be a great fit for you. So I was like, okay. I trusted Miss Janie. She's the best. She's since retired. Nonetheless, I did the research, found a trainer locally here in Atlanta, sent her information to Miss Janie for her to say yay or nay. Is this a good training for me to attend? Of course, she approved it. What I said to Miss Janie was, when I consulted with her about going into private practice, was, Miss Janie, brain spotting or EMDR? And Miss Janie's response was, brain spotting all the way. With that being said, that is how I got here. And beyond arriving here with brain spotting, I was absolutely gifted with Dr. David Grand. To this day, remains my mentor, my boogaloo, my friend, my brother. Like, David is simply amazing. And one of the most amazing things for me as it pertains to David, as a Jewish identifying white passing gentleman in New York, who is also the founder and developer of Brain Spotting. He and I met at the very first Persons of Color training, which started off as a project. I was a host of that event in Atlanta after refusing. Let me say that for the record. And it was fearful to just even have the consideration of persons of color training. Why are you asking me, Cynthia, to do this? And as I look back on it, it scared me because of my own trauma and the layering of what I have survived through and healed. And so when Cynthia approached me about supporting this training, it really contracted me because one of my trauma points has been my trauma has come at the hands of girls that look like me, not dominant cultured white people. So that was a hard one for me to even accept. And Cynthia was relentless. And I'm so happy that she was, or I wouldn't be here. And so here's what I'm saying. You never know who has been sent to you as a guide. You never know who sees something in you that you can't see in yourself. You never know how life is going to unfold for you. If I can say anything, please be open, literally. With that being said, I never considered being the first Black female brain spotting trainer in the world. I never imagined that my niche would be trauma healing. I never imagined much would be along that road. So, with that being said, guess who I met at that training, which became one of the main reasons that I agreed to participate with the Persons of Color project. One of the major reasons was I kept saying no, no, no to Cynthia, and she said, "You'll get a chance to study with David." I said, "Huh?" I said I could study with David Grand, the founder and developer of Brainspotting, and not have to deal with you minions. She laughed chidedly and she said yes. And I thought, well, if I have an opportunity to train and study with a primary source around the modality that he discovered, that would be worth any bullshit I could ever endure, because I got a whole tribe of people that need healing. And with that being said, and I will say it again, healing happens in more than one realm. Brainspotting honors that. In fact, I learned the science of brainspotting through my spiritual knowing. Okay? Brainspotting meets the mind, the body, and spirit where they actually are. You don't have to explain everything to heal. And you don't need a diagnosis to be worthy of relief. Sometimes the most sacred work is done in silence, because this is not just about processing. This is about releasing. Brainspotting offers a door to that release without re-traumatizing the body or even demanding emotional labor. And I'm pausing there with intentionality because I want you to really get that. You know, people ask all kind of questions about Brainspotting because it is less than 25 years old, y'all. And we have empirical data that supports Brainspotting. And people say all the time, how can I, or how can looking at a spot do anything? And I tell them, the body already knows what to do. We're just finally listening. Be clear, this work isn't just clinical for me. It's humanitarian. There is divinity in the pause. It's spiritual for me. And it is justice in a method that doesn't require you to explain your suffering in order to receive care. That's real talk. Because be clear, the body truly does keep the score. And on my own journey, much of my trauma I have found through time has been in utero to pre-verbal trauma. One of the first things I would like to address are the misconceptions. Brainspotting isn't hypnosis. I can't tell you how many people have asked me, is Brainspotting hypnosis? It is not. There are a great deal of folks that still think Brainspotting is hypnosis. Let me say this loud and clear. It's not. It's you. It's your body leading. Another misconception that I'm asked is around EMDR. Another misconception, it's not EMDR. And for you that don't know, EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's known by the acronym EMDR. Here's the deal. Way before David discovered Brainspotting, he was a part of EMDR. In fact, even our discovery story is around a young ice skater who was about 16 years old, that while David was working with her, he did something differently, I should say. If my son were listening, he would be like, Mom, that's differently. Nonetheless, when David was working with that 16-year-old ice skater, she had, first of all, there's no monolithic trauma. Let me be clear about that. It is layered, okay? Just like there is no monolithic people, doesn't exist. With that being said, as David was working with this 16-year-old ice skater, he went off the script, did something differently. And this client brought forth traumas that David thought had been cleared, as well as new content. And David was led, and David still tells the story that when he was working with that client, it felt like something was holding his hand in place right there at that spot, at which he just stayed there. And after that session, the young lady reached out to David to say that she could now do the triple loop that she was unable to do in practice. And so that's part of our discovery story. But nonetheless, brain spotting is not EMDR. And here's another misconception, that you have to retell your story. That's a misconception. You do not have to retell your trauma to heal. Brain spotting doesn't require, nor do we need you to explain your trauma. It gives your nervous system a way to release it without reliving it, which also minimizes re traumatization because oftentimes clients experience re traumatization for various reasons. With this statement, I'm coming from a place of the window of tolerance because sometimes when you're working with clients and their system hasn't scaffolded or doesn't have necessarily the resiliency at that time, nor the coherence, and you keep hammering them with talk therapy and they keep retelling that story, it's actually serving more as re-traumatization than any level of healing. Okay, let me be clear about that. Okay, so there's a sacred silence in this work, a moment when the gaze locks in and the body says, Here, this is where I've been holding it. And especially for Black folks and other folks of color, BIPOC folks, for those raised in survival, it's a powerful tool. It's a powerful experience to be in a healing space that doesn't demand performance. Let me say that again. Brain spotting doesn't require performance. It does not. Healing is not performance, nor is healing confidence. This is why I say the spot is just the start. The story is what unravels when you finally feel safe enough to feel. That's where I'm coming from. Now, I would like to share with you about the science and the soul of it. And be very clear, because brain spotting is such an integral part of my journey and my story. I thought it not robbery to share with you all where I've learned much of this science because brain spotting has actually served as a gateway to trauma modalities. Because, yes, I am a brain spotting trainer. I am also trained in somatic experiencing fully, and I'm also trained in IFS, which is internal family systems. Okay. Excuse me. So when we talk about the science and the soul of it, one of our one of our main mottos is where you look affects how you feel. Okay. And so, where we're coming from with that is simply around the idea that with brain spotting, we use the field of vision. Okay. And we notice your gaze, and we all gaze all the time. But with brain spotting, we make that gaze relevant. We're coming from a place of, say, a client comes in for a session. And as you're talking to that client and you're noticing them, you notice that they have a particular coordinate or a particular direction that they look in as they're talking or sharing or processing around particular content. David has made use of that because what we have found in brain spotting community is that when we're working around an issue, there is a way to move from a spontaneous gaze to a specific gaze, right? It's not just a random, but a specific gaze, right? Because we gaze just spontaneously and naturally. And so we use the field of vision to be able to harness that gaze where the person is actually looking as they're processing and moving and working around particular content. And we're able to hold that in place as the client is working around their content. And what we have found from working from a subcortical brain perspective, which is in the midbrain, we're most interested about the limbic system, the superior colliculi, and all those things. And so just to give you a location, traditional therapy works from a neocortical brain perspective, dealing with your top brain, which is top down. Well, with brain spotting, we work bottom up. We enter through the spine and the brain stem into the brain. Because top down working, there's only one hard wiring for reaching that alert center, which has to do with the hypothalamus, the amygdala, and the periaqueductal gray, or the PAG. With brain spotting, with us working from a bottom up theory, we're able to have more access to from 1 to about 4 million. No, sorry, because the number is huge. From working from the bottom up perspective, there's from 1 to 4 quadrillion connections in the brain, and that's Dr. Daniel Amen's work. Nonetheless, brain spotting becomes a game changer because when we say where you look affects how you feel, it simply asserts in a layman's term perspective is that you can think about the same issue but look at it from different directions physically. Like you can take your eyes and look over to your left as you're thinking about that content, or you can take your eyes and look straight ahead thinking about the same content. Or you can take your eyes and look over to the right, thinking about that same content. And what you're going to notice is you could very likely have a difference of felt sense. You could have a difference of intensity. You can even be able to engage with different aspects of whatever that was that you were thinking about. But when you look at it from different places, locations, coordinates, it does affect how you feel. So that's what we're talking about there. Because what brain spotting does is it finds the place in the visual field that connects to the unprocessed trauma. Brain spotting, by its design, has a way of seeking out trauma capsules, breaking them open for the sake of reprocessing. So brain spotting is dense and it goes fast into the system. And so your nervous system finishes what trauma interrupted without words even. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the science and the soul of it. Okay. And finally, why it matters for our people, for all people, but especially persons of color, because for so long, mental health has been stigmatized, especially when I'm talking about BIPOC communities or Black, Brown, Indigenous folks that have been misdiagnosed, silenced, overtalked, re traumatized, all the things. Brain spotting allows for agency, silence, spiritual connection, and body truth. This is absolutely reparative healing. No performance required. Now, say that to some folks of color. No performance required? That's unheard of. Nonetheless, here's the tea. Here's the deal. You are not broken, my love. Your body has been trying to protect you. And sometimes, the greatest story ever told is the one you don't have to explain. If today's episode resonated with your nervous system or your spirit, share it with someone who's still unlearning and reach out to me. My website is gracecommunitycounseling.com. You can reach me on Instagram at Monroy LPC. That is MONROY LPC. Also, I have offerings from retreats to brain spotting trainings to workshops, you name it. And I am also a speaker. So if you ever need a speaker with my skill set, look me up, give me a call. Let's see what can happen. And absolutely for you clinicians and adjacent body healers, feel free to reach out and attend a brain spotting training. We have trainings all the time. Thank you.